All right, time to check in with Illinois' toughest opponent, at least on paper, on the schedule in the 2023 season, and that's Penn State coming to Champaign in mid-September for what is the Big Ten opener for both of these programs. And I believe Fox, big kickoff, will be there for that game. Tyler Donahue covers Penn State for 24/7 Sports. Tyler, is this the best roster that James Franklin has put together in his time at Penn State?
I don't think he's gone on the record and said just that. I think he's pointed out that positions are as deep as they've been, and he's started to pile up those positions lately. I don't think he will go on the record, but I think a lot of us have who cover the team. I only go back to 2017. My colleague here, Mark Brennan, though, goes back decades, and I know he feels like they've assembled one of the strongest rosters they've had in his time covering this squad, much less in James Franklin's tenure. And it's on both sides of the ball. It's a combination of experience coming back from an 11-win campaign last year, which exceeded expectations, and then this really big swell of young talent. That second-year class, the 2022 freshmen, 11 guys burned red shirts, and that's just an astronomical number for a team that won 11 games. You'd think 11 guys burn red shirts, it's probably a team in transition or a team that's relying on some Band-Aids at certain spots. These guys just naturally won out jobs. Guys like Nick Singleton, Abdul Carter became preseason or became freshman All-Americans last year. And so, look, sophomore slumps are a thing. I think we're all, wary of that with a few of these guys. And there's a lot of eggs in the basket with one of those sophomores and Drew Allar at quarterback. But yeah, right now, I don't think it's even just the roster, Jeremy. I think there's a strong consensus that this coaching staff that James Franklin has assembled is the best he's put together at Penn State. A little bit of a surprise for some, maybe, that Manny Diaz is around for year two as a defensive coordinator. Obviously, there were head coach opportunities he could have pursued after year one here with the success he had. Mike Yurcich has really kind of started to build momentum. He's in year three as your offensive coordinator now, and you go across the list, guys like Terry Smith at cornerbacks coach and Phil Troutwine on the offensive line. They've been around campus for a long time now, and this is their room. They kind of take ownership. They've recruited the guys who are starting. They've recruited the guys who are the backup. So they're in a good place right now, and there's very few excuses to be found in case things don't work out for the Nittany Lions this fall.
I was going to ask, is this the best opportunity for them to win the Big Ten, and how much pressure comes on James Franklin because of that?
I'm hesitant to say, because it feels like next year may be the best opportunity because they don't have Ohio State and Michigan in the same division anymore, because let's face it, that's been a difficult situation for James Franklin and company. They've had their close calls. They've had a few 11-win seasons, but none of them have ended up in the college football playoff, and only one of them has actually led to Indianapolis for the Big Ten championship, which was back in 2016. That was a surprise run, and to this point, Michigan is now taking ownership of that mantle as the team to beat. For so long, it was Ohio State. And Michigan and Penn State historically under Harbaugh and Franklin have kind of exchanged punches. They've exchanged some blowout victories as well. But with Ohio State, you got to go back to that 2016 run to the last time that Penn State beat the Buckeyes. They've had some close calls. They've had late blown leads. They've had gut-wrenching losses, but they have not had wins against Ohio State. So something's got to change. They've got to beat at least one of them. If you beat both of them, considering the rest of the schedule, if you can avoid a stumble, you're probably in really good shape to get to Indy. But you got to go to Columbus. You've got to host the Wolverines here in Beaver Stadium along the way. And oh, by the way, a matchup on the road against Illinois, 11 o'clock local time, is precisely the kind of scary factor that you have to account for in the Big Ten schedule. So, look, there's landmines across the way. I'd feel a lot better in saying they're going to get to the playoff if we were up to a 12-team field right now, because you could say 3 Big Ten teams could get involved there. But right now, until proven otherwise, Penn State, the benefit of the doubt right there is just not in place that they can pile up the bandwagon and drive on through the Buckeyes and Wolverines. And maybe they're where Michigan was in 2021, where not a lot of people even in Ann Arbor were quite buying into that they could get it done until they did. So maybe we're on the verge of it, but until proven otherwise, it's you still kind of slot Penn State third in that Big Ten East, yet that might place them 5th or 6th at large across America right now.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of teams in the Big Ten East that are happy divisions are going away, but I think Penn State might be the happiest, just to have a chance to get to Indy a little bit more often. Drew Allar, he's one of the biggest players to watch in the Big Ten this entire season of the entire conference. Obviously, Sean Clifford, a very great career at Penn State, but there always seemed to be a ceiling to what he brought talent-wise. Allar is the number 1 quarterback in the class of 2022, 5-star prospect. What are the expectations? What is the hype for him right now in Happy Valley?
Well, he walks around campus and he looks like a defensive end. He's 6'5", about 245 pounds. And then you remember that he can touch every blade of grass on the field with the football because of his arm. And he's got a ton of poise. I mean, that's really what you hear about him right now. He's a guy orchestrating the offseason meetups with the wide receivers, with the skill position players on offense. He's got a lot of ground to make up. But I will point out that while Sean Clifford held on to those reins last year, and there were plenty of calls, and at one point there were boos in Beaver Stadium trying to drive James Franklin to make a change. He didn't. To his credit, Sean Clifford, easily the strongest season of his career, and he finished with probably the best game of his life in the Rose Bowl. But now Drew Allar, you referenced ceiling. That's what it is. You're looking at that elevated ceiling for what this offense can accomplish, for what Mike Yurcich can dial up from a play standpoint, and for what your playmakers can do with their speed down the field, because you've got a guy who can really put that ball where it needs to be. And we've heard so much about arm talent, and we've heard dozens of quarterbacks over the past couple of decades who were 6'5", big frame, could launch the ball, and then they fizzled once they got to college football fields because the live bullets came and they didn't stand up to the task, and they couldn't lead a huddle of young men. What we're hearing from Drew Allar, based on a sample size last year when he played as much as any true freshman in a Nittany Lions uniform since Christian Hackenberg back in 2013, Franklin designed some ways there. There were also some injury issues with Clifford at times, so he saw action. But this spring, it's been more his show, this summer as well. And we're hearing that when the pocket starts to collapse around him and pressure is applied and chaos ensues, he remains calm within himself. He can move the pocket. And more importantly, he can make those quick decisions to match a launch pad of an arm. So you put all those things together, and I think where the confidence comes from is he's not playing against a slack defense here. This is a talented bunch. I think talent on paper right now, this could be the best defense in the Big Ten. They're going to have to prove it over the course of 12 games. But they have assembled a serious group of defensive talent under the mind of Manny Diaz, and they're not taking it easy on Drew Allar on the practice field. He was without his top two tight ends because of some injury issues this spring. He was without Olu Fashanu during the spring game. He took some heat, and I think that's a good thing, because looking at the schedule, I don't know when he's going to encounter a defense until maybe we get into October. No offense to Illinois. I love their front, but I think from front to back, this Penn State defense brings a lot to the practice field, and that's going to help him out. And I think right now, when the curtain raises, prime time, West Virginia, September 2nd in Beaver Stadium, there's a lot of optimism that it's going to come together, and the fireworks are going to start with night one. But we got to see, man. Before I covered Penn State, I covered big time college football recruits. That was kind of what my wheelhouse was, and that meant a lot of quarterbacks. And you talk to guys who were 16, you were sure they were going to end up in the NFL. You were sure they were going to end up starting 30 college games. They may not even gotten to one start before they transferred to 3 other schools. So you're just not sure. But right now, people are very excited about Drew Allar, who, by the way, has not been named QB1 yet by James Franklin. But stay tuned.
Yeah, thanks for that update. We have pins and needles for that one. Pair of good running backs, excuse me, around him. Olu Fashanu, the number 1 offensive tackle in college football. How good is this offense around him?
I mean, it's remarkable, because a year ago, Olu had one career start. He started the Outback Bowl, which was a loss in New Year's Day of 2022. And we knew he was going to ascend to the starting left tackle job. We didn't know that by the time October rolled around, he'd be showing up in the top half of mock drafts round 1 for the next year. We're thinking, well, enjoy this guy while you got him. And during the Ohio State matchup, he goes down, which obviously hurt them late stages against the Buckeyes in Beaver Stadium last year. But he missed the rest of the regular season, 5 games, and he missed the Rose Bowl. So he played in 7 of 13 games for a team that really found their groove late. And it felt like we were heading toward, well, this is going to be one of those what-if kind of careers, here and gone, off to the NFL. It's just too much opportunity. He turned it down. He stuck around. He's got the highest GPA on this entire roster, by the way, and he's also projected as the highest draft pick on this roster. So it's a good combination, and I think when you look at the offensive line, it's a strength for this team, and I've never said that covering this team ever going into a year, and so that tells you where in year 4 under Phil Trautwein it has come. It was such a question mark going into last season. They've now got 6 guys back who started at least 5 games last year. They had to do some shuffling. Olu Fashanu missed time. Their left guard, Landon Tengwall, missed the final 7 games of the season. They were banged up across there, and they still fortified things. So a big move for them is Hunter Norzad, who was really quality last year. He stepped up with Landon Tengwall out. He's going to be playing center now. He was the left guard last year. He was the backup initially. Then he was the starter for the final 7 matchups. He's a Cornell transfer, brought that Ivy League degree, came to town, and he's in year 2. It's year 6 overall at college for him. So it feels like they're in good hands for a guy at center who brings some serious athleticism and physicality, but also the brains that you want in front of a young quarterback. They lost Juice Scruggs, who was a second-round pick. So, that's a significant loss. He was a team captain for them and a catalyst. Question for this offensive line is right tackle. Caden Wallace has played a lot of football for them. He's been their starting right tackle when healthy for the last few years, but he missed the final few regular season games last year with an injury. Came back as a backup for the Rose Bowl, and now they've got Drew Shelton pushing him on that side. Drew Shelton was a true freshman last year, started the last 5 games of the season with Olu Fashanu sidelined, and so it's a bit of a learning curve going from the left side to the right side at the tackle spot, but that's something to watch because I think they need more than average play from that spot. If they can get above average to good or great play at right tackle, not going to be able to poke a lot of holes in this offensive line, and I think they'll probably come this Illinois matchup. I don't think I'd be surprised if they're going 7 or 8 offensive linemen with regularity because Phil Troutwine isn't going to shy away. If he feels like guys give him a chance to win the game, he won't just stick with 5. So you could see rotations at right guard, right tackle, left guard. Olu's untouchable at left tackle, and I think Hunter Norzad is going to be the man at center.
Well, you think about 2 years ago in that epic, if we want to call it that, 9 overtime win for Illinois that shocked the nation. 62 rushing yards for Penn State, 357 for Illinois. It was just, that was kind of the coming out party, I think, for Illinois' defensive line with Johnny Newton, Keith Randolph, and all of them. But also, it was just shocking to see Illinois win in the trenches. So now we're talking about Penn State. Their strength could be the offensive line. And Phil Steele lists Penn State as the number 1 defensive line, number 1 linebacker. So top defensive front in the Big Ten. They seem to have made a lot of strides since Illinois last saw Penn State.
Yeah, I mean that was a bot. We thought it was a low point, but that was a bit of just a spiral that ensued during that 2021 season. It went from 5-0 to 7-6. So last year was definitely kind of a let's prove it. James Franklin already had a long contract extension in his back pocket, but it was kind of like, where's the program? We got to figure this out. We'll call COVID a wash, but then they followed it up with a 7-6 season. So are they going to get back to the pursuit of Big Ten titles here? And they did, to their credit, and finishing with 11 victories and finishing on a 5-game win streak after that loss to Ohio State. And so I think defensively, a big answer was provided there from Manny Diaz because Brent Pry was the right-hand man for James Franklin on the staff for a while. He went and took over as Virginia Tech's head coach, and you thought, okay, is the defense blueprint going to stay the same? Is it going to get blown up? And you saw some typical calling cards that we were familiar with prior to Manny Diaz's arrival, but there was a different aggressiveness to it. And man, there was just so much implemented talent. I mean, Manny Diaz was going like 25 deep in game 1, and it just kept going. In game 1 against Purdue went down to the wire. It wasn't like they were just rotating guys late in the game, and that stayed all season long. So they were fresh. And they had a guy like Chop Robinson, who by a lot of people's projections is going to be a first-round pick next year. He wasn't a starter for them technically last year. He was the 3rd defensive end. It never logged a start, and they had guys like Kobe King at middle linebacker coming off the bench and playing 300+ snaps. And so it was a little to look at starters versus backups in this defense is a little bit tricky. They lose Joey Porter Jr., who's an All-American at the cornerback position. They lose a stalwart at defensive tackle and PJ Mustipher, who's been around for a while. But one area where I think only gets better, and you can make a case that defensive back and defensive line have gotten better, but linebacker, you lose Jonathan Sutherland. He was a backup last season, converted safety. That's all you lost in terms of experience. So you bring back a couple guys who were essentially splitting starting roles at Mike linebacker and Tyler Elsdon and Kobe King. You bring back Curtis Jacobs, who's a 3rd-year starter, has a ton of Big Ten play under his belt, former 5-star prospect. And then Abdul Carter, who, man, he just took the world by storm last year as a force in the Big Ten last year. And now I think people are kind of saying he could be the Big Ten linebacker of the year as a sophomore. But is he going to make inroads at Mike position? Is he going to stay at the will linebacker spot? Because they brought in another freshman here. It's LBU for a reason, I guess, because they just keep showing up at the doorstep. Tony Rojas came to town, and he put on 30 pounds in his first semester. He could factor in at the will position. So he's making Manny Diaz, I think, come up with some imaginative ways to implement his linebackers. They could go 6-7 deep with regularity, but there's some all-American talent at the top of that group. And then you factor in where they can probably go 3 deep at defensive end and defensive tackle. They can throw a lot of bodies, a lot of speed at you. And I just think that's a challenge. Even if you don't end up with a bunch of stars from that mix, you've got enough really good players there and a bunch of blue chip caliber talent. And I think where a lot of teams are just not going to have answers up front.
Besides Allar, Tyler, what is the biggest question mark about this team?
Wide receiver position. So we kind of, I guess, tether that to Drew a little bit as a quarterback. But look, in the backfield, he's going to be able to rely on probably at least the second best in the Big Ten in terms of running back tandem, maybe the second best in the country with Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton. Singleton's getting a ton of love right now, deservedly so. Big Ten freshman of the year. Do not sleep on Kaytron Allen. He was a force last year. He got just as much work as Nick Singleton every step of the way. And I think he has noticed, and so is running backs coach Jaywan Sider, that he is getting slept on a little bit. So I think we're going to see a chip on the shoulder out of Kaytron Allen. But things are good there. Things are really good at tight end. I think even though you lost second-round pick in Brenton Strange, Theo Johnson is an absolute force. He has the specimen about him to be a first-round talent if he can put together a complete season at tight end. He's got to be available for them. He's had some injury issues, but he's about 270 pounds, Jeremy, at 6'5" plus, and he's a former top 5 tight end prospect. We're going to see that shine through. At wide receiver, you look through and you just don't have a lot of guys that you can hang your hat on right now. Keandre Lambert-Smith had an explosive finish to last season. Big performance in the Rose Bowl. Nice way to cap things off for him. But he now says he wants to be wide receiver 1. And to this point, he's been wide receiver 3, maybe a fringe wide receiver 2 last year with Parker Washington injured late in the season. So that's asking a lot. They bring in Dante Cephas from Kent State. He was one of the more coveted transfers at the wide receiver position. Big time numbers, almost 2,000 receiving yards the last couple of years in the MAC, but this ain't the MAC. So we're going to find out about how that transitions. They brought in Malik McClain, who started some games for Florida State in the past. He's a 6'4", big body, 200-pound receiver who can be a vertical threat down the field, but still there's a learning curve there. And there's a reason that he left the Seminoles. He wasn't going to be a starter for them. And I think you just look at the in-house kind of the swell of young talent. They have 5 second-year wide receivers. Only one of them burned redshirt last year. That's a name to know in Amari Evans. But Caden Saunders was their top-ranked receiver signing last year. Pretty big name out of the state of Ohio in the Columbus area. Ohio State never offered. Penn State signed him. Came to town with some serious speed. I think he's starting to put it together. And then the son of former Packers receiver Donald Driver, an all-pro in the NFL. His son Christian is now a redshirt freshman, was at cornerback for the Nittany Lions last year. Decided switching things up, following in dad's footsteps, playing receiver, good early returns on him. But that's why I'm mentioning so many names at wide receiver here, Jeremy, because we don't have a bunch. And I guess when you're naming 10 guys, it's because you can't lock it in. And oh, by the way, you've got Sean Clifford's little brother, Liam Clifford, who's a year 3 guy. It could be a factor in the slot. They've got to have at least 5-6 guys to count on here because they have the arm talent, I think, to get it done. And wide receiver, James Franklin keeps saying it this offseason. Wide receiver is the spot where you can beat teams. Running backs got to make too many guys miss, got to break too many tackles. You got to make one guy miss at wide receiver. You're seeing it change the way college football teams attack at every single conference. In conferences, we didn't think that wide receiver was going to become the alpha position. And James Franklin has been really banging in the drum. They made a change at the wide receiver coach too, bringing in Marcus Sagans, firing Taylor Stubblefield. So a lot is riding on making sure that Drew Allar has the supporting cast from that group.
Well, West Virginia is a start. That's a pretty fun start in Happy Valley there. And obviously you're always going to circle the dates of Ohio State, which is October 21st, and Michigan, November 11th. Obviously Illinois is not top of mind for Penn State fans, but 2 years ago, Illinois shocked the world with beating them. What do you make of that game? 11 a.m. kickoff. Illinois has got 2 tough games before that: Toledo, MAC champion at home, and then you have Kansas on the road. So we'll find out a lot more about Illinois probably in the first 2 weeks than Penn State. But what does that game mean for Penn State coming to Champaign?
I'm glad you emphasized Illinois' first couple games when you were on my podcast this week, because I don't know if people carry enough respect for what they're going to have to go through if they get to 2-0 in this Penn State matchup. It will have certainly been earned. Whereas Penn State, look, West Virginia, I'm anticipating probably a sub 500 season for them. They might have a lame duck coach down there. And then Delaware comes to town for a noon kickoff the next week. So what will we learn? I'm not sure, but I do know that if things go well for Penn State, the Drew Allar hype train is going to be riding. You might have some Heisman buzz for one of these running backs, and they're going to be 2-0 and probably pushing toward the top 5 in rankings. But to me, Illinois is where we're going to start to learn a lot about this and start to peel back some of those layers with Penn State, because that's going to be a different kind of football than what West Virginia is going to bring to town. West Virginia is not going to be a hard-nosed defensive team. I'm not thinking they're going to be very tough up front in the offensive line based on what I've heard from people down in Morgantown. Totally different situation in Illinois. You're going to be going up against some serious walls on both sides of the balls here, and I think that's going to challenge this offensive front. Look, they did it 1 year, and I'm saying they're a strength now. But let's see them sustain it. We see the calling card teams in the Big Ten, the Michigans and Ohio State. It's year after year where you can kind of hang your hat on, whoever we lose, we're going to be able to put together a pretty solid offensive line. Now, Penn State lost some pieces, but they have a lot there. Are they fortified enough in week 3 where this Illinois test comes at them? They pass it. They keep Drew Allar cleaning up. They're able to create rushing lanes, which they could not do against Illinois a couple of years ago. And then I think defensively, they need to avoid a punch in the mouth before they get right. You just want to see them be going into the season and get right. A couple of years ago, they got punched in the mouth in Beaver Stadium by Illinois. Then that was their wake-up call. Last year, they got walloped on the road against Michigan. They ran it down their throat. That forced them to kind of change things up, look in the mirror. The rest of the way, they were a different defense. You want to avoid that moment here in week 3. And I think so that front seven's under some scrutiny. Some of these new safeties are going to be under some scrutiny against Illinois, because I really think that's what it's going to come down to for them, is really controlling this game in the box defensively and be able to apply that pressure. So ultimately, I think we're going to learn more about Illinois through the first 2 weeks, like you said, than Penn State. Where that could change is if Penn State struggles and stumbles at some point, or one of these games is very dicey. But even if they skate by West Virginia and roll over Delaware, we get to September 16th. I think a lot of us who cover the program closely are still going to be waiting to firmly put our feet on the bandwagon here and say Penn State's going to go roll through the Big Ten. We want to see it against Illinois. And to your point, Jeremy, if Illinois staggers into this one and doesn't handle their business through a 2-0 start, then maybe the complexion of this matchup looks a little bit different from my perspective as well.
Yeah, the one thing I can't wait for this game, Tyler, I think Penn State's got the talent advantage in the skill positions, but there's going to be a lot of NFL scouts there. The talent in the trenches with obviously Penn State with Fashanu, with Abdul Carter, with Chop Robinson. I mean, they're just loaded up front. And then Kalen King obviously is potentially a very high draft pick, but Johnny Newton, Keith Randolph, Julian Pearl, all those guys going against each other in the trenches. There's going to be a lot of that film and the 2024 NFL draft. So I'm looking forward to that part of the battle mostly.
And Jeremy, I'll just say Penn State has always done a really good job with this 1-0 mentality. Every game matters as much as the next one, at least out to us outwardly, public settings, reporter settings, media scrums. But this one's going to carry something. These guys know what happened in Beaver Stadium. They were feeling really good about that season early on through about 6 weeks of the 2021 year. They were back inside the top 10. They felt like they had a good thing going. Got back into Beaver Stadium and just got manhandled in so many ways by Illinois. Shocked a lot of people. The 9 overtime just was the salt in the wound, how that one played out. So a lot of players are still on that team. They were younger. Maybe they weren't the starters or notable figures in that matchup that day, but that was an embarrassment. I mean, there's really no other way to look around it from a Nittany Lions perspective. I think they were ranked inside the top 10 that afternoon as well. And so I think they're going to carry that with them into this matchup. I'd imagine they won't tell us as much, I think, leading up to kickoff, but I do detect we'll be picking that up on the practice field that week. And so something to monitor, that and the ensuing matchup for them, home against Iowa, whiteout game. A couple years ago, there were some boos at Iowa because of Penn State injuries. People thought they were being fake. So back-to-back weeks where you could say maybe there's some extra incentive in early Big Ten play for the Nittany Lions to cast aside some demons from recent seasons.
Well, Tyler Donahue, it's going to be a fun season in Penn State and Happy Valley. Obviously, some high expectations there, but can't wait for that game because we're going to learn a lot about these two teams. Tyler Donahue, thanks for the time, man.
Thank you.